The west side of Chicago is filled to the brim with urban decay, and one forgotten piece of infrastructure that I've always been fascinated with was the abandoned Bloomingdale Line, now called the 606. Initially constructed in 1873 by the Chicago and Pacific Railroad Company as a part of a 36-mile route extending from Halsted Street in Chicago to the suburb of Elgin, this freight corridor ultimately faced decline and abandonment in the 1990s as freight services fell to unsustainable levels. Having lived in Chicago myself around that time, I had always thought of the Bloomingdale Trail as an abandoned set of elevated tracks. With that in mind, I was very surprised to find out that a 2.7-mile section of the elevated tracks have recently been repurposed, and that these days you can actually walk the entirety of the structure. So what's the story behind the Bloomingdale Trail, aka the 606, and what remains of its original structure? Stay tuned to find out, as today we discover the history of Chicago's forgotten 606. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Before getting started today, I need to take a moment to tell you guys about something very concerning. Did you know that with just one forged document, someone could legally become the owner of your home? This scam, known as house stealing, happens more often than you'd think. In other words, you could lose your home without even realizing it in just a matter of days. Fortunately, there's a way to protect yourself. Home Title Lock, the sponsor of this video. Let me elaborate. Title fraud occurs when criminals illegally transfer the title of your property into their name using forged documents filed with the county recorder's office. Although the system is supposed to be secure, its vulnerabilities allow these scams to go unnoticed. Once they obtain the title, they can take out loans against your home or even sell it to others, and you wouldn't know about it until it's already too late. That's where Home Title Lock comes in, protecting your home's title with its exclusive triple lock protection. This service includes 24/7 monitoring, alerts if any new activity is detected, and a US-based team of legal experts to help you restore your property if you become a victim of fraud, avoiding lengthy and costly processes. So don't wait to become a victim. Sign up today at hometitlelock.com/itshistory or click the link in the description to get 30 days of free protection and a comprehensive title history report to ensure that you're not already a victim. At the end of the day, our home is much more than bricks and walls. It's where we share our unique moments with our families and always find peace. Protecting it means safeguarding everything we value most. Thank you, Home Title Lock, for sponsoring this video. And now, back to our story. Let's travel back over 150 years to 1837, when Chicago was incorporated as a city in Illinois in the Midwestern United States of America. Back then, Chicago found itself in a very beneficial situation, considering the drive for trade and westward expansion into new territory. These factors rapidly created a central economic hub. Then, with the railroad's arrival, Chicago became one of the world's fastest growing cities. And by around 1857, the earliest seeds of the Bloomingdale Line were sown. Most would specifically credit the line's name to August Steinhaus, a Chicago highway commissioner who dug up the street and labeled it Bloomingdale Road, an anglicized version of the Dutch word which roughly translates to Valley of Flowers. Anyhow, from that point onward, Bloomingdale Avenue remained a constant part of Chicago transit. And in that spirit, by 1871, the railroad companies had been devising plans to connect major cities, and Chicago was a top priority. Perhaps most urgent was a joint effort to connect the two states of Illinois and Wisconsin. To achieve this, the Wisconsin Union Railroad Company began to build rails from Milwaukee to the state's border with Illinois, whereas the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway of Illinois was also established to set up Chicago's side of that same link. Efforts such as these helped to connect the entire United States at the time. By the time 1873 began, the entire stretch of rails between Milwaukee and Chicago came under the newly formed Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway Company, a name that Chicagoans would see quite frequently. Anyhow, during this period, Chicago also allowed a separate railroad to begin developing, right in the heart of the prized location, the Bloomingdale Trail. As the story goes, in 1872, the Chicago and Pacific Railroad Company started constructing rails on Bloomingdale Road. And although we have a tendency to think, in hindsight at least, that the people were enthusiastic about this kind of development, it turns out that not everyone was on board. In fact, many protested the Bloomingdale Line. As construction was started on the rails of Bloomingdale, the Chicago and Pacific Railroad had to defend themselves in legal battles, claiming that the rail company did not handle local property safely and owed locals money for diminishing their property values. Regardless of these potential pushbacks, the rail company kept building to meet their ambitious 1874 deadline. They succeeded against all odds, and to avoid confrontation during the day, construction workers completed the project in the middle of a Saturday night, with the finishing touches being the crossing at Goose Island. Locals reacted furiously, and according to some sources, riots tore apart portions of the rail line, though their actions were in vain, as seemingly nothing could stop Chicago's development. Then, by the end of the 1880s, the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway Company took over the Bloomingdale Line after financial troubles hit the Chicago and Pacific Company. At that point, the rails had been given enough time to show its potential for local growth in the northwest portion of the city. Some people came to accept the trains in their neighborhood, while others could not ignore the chaos and danger caused by large machinery tearing through residential spaces. As the years passed, pressure from the city corporate council forced the Bloomingdale Line to be physically elevated as a massive safety measure. And in the end, the ordinance introducing this measure was passed on June the 27th, 1910. In other words, the tracks were to be elevated. Chicago provided workers with yet another ambitious deadline. The elevation was to be completed by 1915, an almost unreasonable expectation of just 5 years of work. To tackle this, the company brought on Robert James Middleton, a brilliant engineer, to lead the project. And to everyone's surprise, by June the 30th, 1915, using the advanced technology of the time and a team of skilled engineers, the Bloomingdale Line was almost entirely elevated, making it significantly safer. The elevation, rising about 20 additional feet, also helped bring the community closer together. The impact was immediately noticeable. Industries took full advantage of the railroad's improved function, and companies began directly connecting their facilities to the line. Now, for the owners, the St. Paul Company, they enjoyed this as their golden age, as the Bloomingdale Line brought them a significant financial standing. Though, like all good things, it wouldn't last forever. As automobiles emerged around the United States, commerce changed profoundly, and it didn't take long for trucks to replace trains. As the age-old story goes, the railroads fell into decline. The freight shifted to rubber tires, and bankruptcy after bankruptcy began striking the railroads. St. Paul was not immune. Now, if we fast forward to 1986, the Soul Line Railroad, which was a part of the Canadian Pacific Railway, acquired the majority of the lines in this area. But it was not meant to be, as by the 1990s, the new owners abandoned the Bloomingdale Trail altogether, with the final end of freight service happening in 2001. Surprisingly, the idea of converting these elevated tracks into a greenway was considered as far back as 1997. The idea brought many organizations together, and amazingly, by 2015, the completed and repurposed trail opened, known as the 606. Key contributors included the City of Chicago, the nonprofit Friends of the Bloomingdale Trail, which focused on advocacy, but there was also the Trust for Public Land, which coordinated the planning and development, whereas Collins Engineers Incorporated contributed to the design and the later stages of the project. And of course, we have to mention that Alpha Wood Foundation provided significant financial support. Now, what I find interesting here is the contrast between the elevated path today and the former locations that once used the service. Starting at the west end of the trail, there is a modern spiral-style ramp where pedestrians can enter the pathway. Now, what I find interesting here is that when you turn back Google Maps to around 2010, the tracks were still technically connected to the live network, though from 2015 onward, all ties are physically severed. Now, if you head east for a few blocks, you'll pass over interesting old viaducts before entering a massive, beautiful modern garden. And in my opinion, this area offers a truly impressive contrast. Though, if we turn back the satellite images to 2010 again, you'll see that these same tracks were used to store old freight wagons. A bit further east, and we come upon Julia de Burgos Park. an area named in honor of the poet and member of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. And this is a very important part of the trail, as it's here that you can take an exit ramp off into Humboldt Park. And I have to imagine that the residents of this area must be happy to have traded a very decrepit looking park from 2010 for this reinvigorated and hopefully safer modern equivalent. Anyhow, the trail carries on this way for 2.7 miles before ultimately terminating at the highway. The line previously ran under the highway before linking up with the rest of the network. You can still see the remains of the elevated structure, which was demolished about a decade ago, as well as many other traces of fading rail lines around the north branch of the Chicago River, including a very interesting defunct bridge that seems to now be laid up along the riverbank. I could follow these abandoned old tracks all day long, but I think you pretty much get the idea by now, so we're going to leave it there for today. I hope you'll consider subscribing. Thank you for watching. Otherwise, until next time, I'm Ryan Sokesh, signing off.